To another edition of Forensic Focus. I'm your host, Charles Amodio with FAZ Forensics. At FAZ Forensics, we specialize in business valuation and forensic accounting. When answers matter, FAZ delivers. And today, I'd like to introduce my partner, Dave Consigli. Dave, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Charlie. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. How was your weekend?
It was great. Sun's shining today. You know, the weekend's always good.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day here. This morning, I was actually complaining because I was having a hard time seeing my computer because of the glare with the sun. But, first world problems, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that problem sitting in my basement.
Absolutely, absolutely. So anything new going on? Any good news to report?
All good. Business is great. We're very busy. We're always looking for more. We have got some good relationship with the legal community on a lot of the litigation matters that we have going on. And we've been meeting with the attorneys, which has been great. We're kind of doing a meet and greet with our lunches, and those have been going very successful.
Excellent, excellent. So tell me, what are you reading right now, Dave?
I don't want to say I read like multiple books at a time, but I actually do. I mean, I'm Catholic, so it's Lent. So I do read a daily reflection for Lent. I have a little book that my wife works at a church, so she is very, very good at giving me these little things to read to keep me in perspective. Reading another book called Running in Faith, Devotion for Runners. And then on the business side, I just finished Rocket Fuel, which is a EOS book, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. I think I'm kind of addicted to those books. Like the Rocket Fuel book has nothing to do with the position that I'm in at our firm. It has to do with our visionary and our integrator, but I just love reading it. I'm addicted to it. I love seeing the efficiency, how our firm runs. So that's pretty much what I got going on right now.
Good. So Dave, at our firm, you're our valuation expert. And I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the key factors that influence a business valuation?
It's funny because a lot of people always imagine that a business valuation is similar to like an appraisal on your house, where you look for market comps and things of that nature. But the truth is that the number one thing that impacts the valuation of a business is the purpose of the valuation, which is not really like opinion shopping type of thing. But if you have a valuation for litigation purposes, whatever law is applicable to that business litigation is how the business is valued. For instance, in a divorce, it depends on what state you're valuing the company in, because there are state laws regards to divorce, which also translate to how that how that business is valued. For instance, do you take discounts or you don't take discounts? If it's a valuation for estate or gift or anything to do with the IRS has a definition of how that business is valued. For instance, on estate and gift, it's the definition of fair market value, which is the price in which a business would exchange hands between a willing buyer, a willing seller, and neither one of them under the compulsion to buy or sell. It's based on Revenue Ruling 5960, which may be the only revenue ruling I know for the IRS. So even though I'm a CPA, but it may only be the only one I have to know. And then there are so many other impacts of the valuation, the economic conditions, the inflation, and where the company is located, what state, what industry. We could do a whole week of podcast based on the effects of business valuation.
Yeah. You mentioned economic conditions such as inflation or recession. How does that impact the valuation of a business?
So I think if you break it down to the nuts and bolts, and we get asked this question all the time: have you ever valued a fill in the blank? The basis of a valuation is really what's the cash flow that is generated to the owner, right? I mean, how much, after everything is paid off, how much cash flow as an investor or an owner am I going to get from that business? So if you think of all the things that affect cash flow, then that's what affects the value of the business. So if you're in an inflationary period and your expenses are going up, but you're not be able to pass that on to a consumer, then that's absolutely going to affect the value of your business, because it's going to affect the cash flow at the end of the day that goes to that owner. So to put it pretty simple, yes, values of business are affected by inflation, and rates of returns are affected by inflation, and that all affects the cash flow that ends up going to the owner.
And can you talk a little bit about the valuation methods? I know there's the income, market, and asset-based approach. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, there's three methods, three approaches to value in a company. There's the income method, which is what I was just saying. What's the cash flow that's generated to the owner, and what's the rate of return an investor would require to get that cash flow? In simpler terms, the equation is the numerator is the income. What's the income slash cash flow that goes to the investor or the owner? And the denominator is what rate of return would they require to get that income? And if you take the income and you divide it by the rate of return, you come up with a value. So that's the income method. Now, there's various ways to arrive at that income, and it gets much more complicated than that. If it's a stable company, that's what's called the single period capitalization, where you take that income and you divide by the rate of return. If it's an unstable company, either a company that's in growth, in the growth stage, or a company that's in decline, well, then now what you have to do is you have to forecast out those cash flows and then take the present value of those cash flows based on the rate of return being a discount rate to come up with a value. So that's the income method. The income method is probably used, I would say, 90% of the time of the companies that we're valuing. The other two methods are the market method and the asset method. The asset method is probably the simplest. The asset method is taking all the assets of the company, adjusting them to fair market value, subtracting all the debt or the liabilities, so the money that you owe from that in that company, and whatever's left over is the value of the assets. Asset values are probably prominently used by companies, holding companies, such as real estate investment companies. So think of, I have a commercial building and I rent it out. What's the appraised value of that building, less the mortgage that's owed on that building, and then that's the value of the company. So let's say it's held in a partnership or an LLC. It's important to note that asset methods are only applicable for shareholders or owners of that company that have control. So in other words, they own more than 50% of the company. And the reason being is because if I have a non-controlling interest in a company, I don't have the ability to sell that asset. So it's only applicable to controlling interest. The income method can be controlling interest or non-controlling interest. And then the final one is the market method. The market method is it's similar to when we get our houses appraised. And they say, this house in your town, similar size, number of bedrooms, baths, sold for X amount of money. So the market method is similar to that, where are there either publicly traded companies that are similar to yours, and what are they selling? What's the stock selling for publicly? Or private transactions that have happened in the marketplace? What did they sell for, and how do you apply that to your company? The market method is very difficult to use because, quite frankly, when it comes to publicly traded companies, it's really hard to find publicly traded companies that are similar to our companies that we're valuing. Publicly traded companies are much larger than most of the businesses that we're valuing that we see every day. So it's really hard to come up with those multiples and find comparable companies. When it comes to private transactions are difficult to come by because, quite frankly, the information is just not there. Going back to the example of selling our house, it's easy to find that information. It's public knowledge. You can even look in the paper, and real estate agents have that information. We don't necessarily have that information available. And when we do have databases that show us transactions, we don't know the details behind it. Why did the company sold? Who sold it? Was it a fire sale? Was it an estate sale? Were there any synergies on the sale? Did a bigger company buy the smaller company out, which would not necessarily give you fair market value? Important to note when we talk about controlling and non-controlling interest, publicly traded companies are non-controlling interests. So those are interests less than 51%, right? Because it's a public market. So you have to make that adjustment if you use them. Where on the other hand, the private transaction method is usually a controlling interest because it's a privately held company, and it would be somebody that has a controlling interest that can force the sale of that company. It gets pretty complicated. Oftentimes we'll see, when you talk about like mistakes that we see in valuations, if I did an income method, a market method, and an asset method, if the asset method was applicable, then they all should pretty come close to each other in the result. And if they don't, then you know something's wrong. And usually it's one method is not applicable. Sometimes you'll see a valuation where one method will come out to $3 million, another method will come out to $1 million, and they say the value of the company is $2 million. Well, no, that's not the case. It's either 3 million or 1 million. So if they're that far off, then you know you have a discrepancy and probably something's wrong, either in the way you applied the method or just the method itself.
Now, are there specific industries that are more resilient or vulnerable to economic fluctuations? When you're in your experience, when you're looking at valuing a business,
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And the best example I can give you of that is COVID, right? If you were a dentist, COVID might have killed you, right? COVID might have really affected your business and what's going on in the economy. However, if you were a liquor store, you thrived during COVID. We did a valuation of a home and garden center that their net profit was 7 times higher in 2020 than it was in any other year. And that was basically because everybody was home doing nothing. So that's when they decided, I'm going to redo my yard over. And they were flocking to the home and garden centers and buying stuff up and redoing their yard over. Now, the challenge with that is that when you're looking at forecasting the future cash flow of any business, you really need to take into consideration anomalies, right? Non-recurring items. Does that mean the value of that business went up 7 times? No, because that was a one-time thing. It slowly went back down to normal and is operating in a normal cycle now. Or even in the beginning, like actually the following years might not have been as well. So economic conditions, the good thing, I remember a financial planner told me once when I was saying to him, I asked him the question about, how's your business? Isn't it tough because we're in a recession? Obviously, I'm showing my age because I think this was back in like 2008. And he said to me, no, because there's always, when one business isn't doing well, there's always another business that offsets that. There's yin and there's yang. There's always something that what the economy hurts one helps another. So yeah, it's very, very important about, looking at the ups and downs. And, it's one of the reasons why when you value a business and you're trying to predict the future, we often look at the past to indicate the future, because the economy and the industry goes up and down, and you want to capture a complete business cycle in order to forecast what that future earnings are going to be.
Right. It's interesting because in dealing with some of the business interruption claims that I work on from time to time, and looking at the lost profits of a business, COVID had such an impact on certain industries. Liquor stores did phenomenal during COVID, but now, as probably in the last 18 to 24 months, the prior 18 to 24 months, as you're looking at companies that came out of COVID and comparing them to what they did post-COVID, that's always a challenge, and how you evaluate the lost profits and taking that COVID year into consideration is going to have an impact on your lost profits projections. So I could definitely see that and relate to that in the business interruption world. Now, how about mergers and acquisitions? What role does valuation play in mergers and acquisitions?
So in the M&A space, probably to give you some background, there's different types of valuations. There's a conclusion of value where we get hired to do a valuation for estate tax purposes, for maybe a shareholder buyout, for divorce, or what have you, where we say, in our opinion, the value of the company is $1 million. And put a gun to my head, and I'm going to tell you it's $1 million all day long. There's also what is called a calculation of value. And in our firm, we call it a strategic business valuation. And that's exactly what it is. So a calculation of value is where you and the client agree to a valuation method. So let's say we're going to do an income method and we're going to do a discounted cash flow, where we're going to forecast out the next 5 years and value it based on our forecast. So a calculation of value, you and the client agree to the method, and then you may come up with a range. So when it comes to the mergers and acquisition space, what we do is we say, for instance, we had a client come to us maybe 3 or 4 months ago and said, you did a valuation for us for me to buy out one of my shareholders. Now I have a company that's interested in buying my business. And I want to know, how much do you think they'll pay for it? So we sat down with the client and we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do a strategic business valuation, a calculation of value. And what we did is we ran scenarios for them. Okay, let's say there's going to be synergistic value. So we can add back your rent expense. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how much is it worth to this buyer. So we'll add back rent expense because they're not going to need your office space. 3 years down the road, we're going to add back your salary because they're not going to need you. And then we're going to do things like, let's say they can double your sales. So 100% of your sales, what would the value be in that case? Let's say if they increase your sales 80%, what would the value be in that case? And then 50%. So what we had is, again, exactly what we say, strategic business valuation, where we say, okay, now your company is worth anywhere from 3 million to 8 million. And that helps you say, okay, we're not accepting less than 3. And it might be worth 8 million to them, but they're probably not going to pay every penny that it's worth to them, right? So now we know maybe somewhere in between. Now, what's your sweet spot? What would make you go away? What's your going away price? And it helps because people ask me, oftentimes they'll say, I want to sell my business. What should I put it on the market for? And I'll say, I know what you shouldn't take less than. But you put it on the market and then you let people bid. You don't necessarily say, I want to sell it for $3 million, unless it's a smaller business that might be listed by a business broker, then you might put a price on it. But yeah, I love those valuations because I don't want to say there's no pressure, but I don't have to worry about an attorney cross-examining me and ripping apart every page of my 60-page report for 3.5 hours while I sit on the stand in court.
Sure.
And you can really help them out. Not that you don't help people out in litigation, because I think we do.
Right.
But those are really fun valuations to do.
I just have one more question today. And that question is, how does technology influence the way businesses are valued?
The older I get, the more afraid of technology I get. I feel like it's going to pass me by. I feel like the whole concept of AI, shameless plug, we have a panel on AI coming up, right?
Right.
I feel like you always get nervous about it because, again, there's two aspects of it. There's the aspect of technology in our practice and how we use it to value our companies. And then there's the aspect of technology on how does that affect the future cash flow that we're projecting, right? So, it absolutely has an impact on our business. When I calm myself down, I think back to my career and all the technology that has happened during our lifetime, during our professional lifetime, right?
Sure.
And we've been able to adapt. We've been able to, on both sides, through our practice and through the valuation. I never knew what AI was until I was at the AICPA Valuation and Forensic Conference, and the keynote speaker talked about AI and pointed out all the things that we use right now that is actually AI, the golf app and all these things. And now I find myself using it more than I ever have. And it is something that we talked about this. The AICPA actually has a podcast that I'm involved in where we're doing a podcast on AI and how it does affect the valuation and how you really have to be up to speed and know what's going on because it does affect the value of companies, more efficiently, possibly eliminating cost. Maybe it's labor cost or what have you. Again, I think the thing about valuation that people have to understand is it is so specific to cases, to industries, to specific companies within those industries, to purpose of the valuation.
Nice. So what are your plans for the rest of the day, Dave?
Meeting after meeting. I'm thinking of attending a webinar on the cannabis industry and what's happening in the cannabis industry, which is one of the areas of specialty that we value in our firm, and hopefully eventually get some work done.
Yeah, I hear you. It's always a challenge when we have these meetings during the day. Dave, that's all the time that we have for today. And I definitely thank you again for participating and answering all my questions, and tell us a little bit more about business valuation and what you do. I appreciate your time.
Excellent. Great to be here.
Thanks, Dave. Talk to you later.
All right, Charlie. Thanks.